Einen wunderschönen guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Ich sehe Sie nicht, ich sehe ein wunderbares englisches Landhaus im Hintergrund, denn Bronwen möchte sich selber nicht beim Lesen sehen. Wäre sie in dieser Buchhandlung und Sie wären auch alle da, würde sie sich ja auch nicht sehen, sondern Sie. Ja, heute Abend also Tell Me More in einer etwas anderen Form, als wir es gewohnt sind. Ich finde es sehr tapfer und toll, dass Sie sich alle eingelinkt haben. Und mehr will ich gar nicht sagen. Heute Abend geht es um berühmte Britinnen und Briten. Es werden nicht 20,5 und 20,5 sein, das erschien uns doch ein wenig lang. Es werden also 10,5 und 10,5 sein. Dann sind wir bei 21 und das ist das Jahr, in dem diese Veranstaltung, die eigentlich für das letzte Jahr, für den Bücherfrühling geplant war, endlich stattfinden kann. Und hier ist Bronwen Gray-Specht.
Danke, Brigitte. Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to be with you, even though it's not in the normal way. Thank you very much for joining Tell Me More. And of course, a big thank you to the wonderful Hiller team for organising it. As you know, this evening is about famous British ladies and gentlemen. Now, a somewhat different connection to the aristocracy. Eliza Marchpane. The huge popularity of marzipan in the 19th century is entirely due to a Cockney girl who became one of the best known and most sought after courtesans in Paris and perhaps in Europe. Born in Stepney, London, in 1760, Eliza Marchpane grew up in extreme poverty. With no schooling and no other way to earn a living, her only option was to become a prostitute. She began by working in the pubs along the very dangerous Ratcliffe Highway. But she quickly realised that once her looks were gone, her income would dry up. So she decided to set off for Paris, knowing nothing of the city or the language. How she lived after arriving is not known, but within a few years she was certainly known to the aristocracy. She dined regularly at the houses of the nobility under the false title Marquesa de Marchpane. Her Cockney French simply made her sound exotic to the Parisian nobility, who admired her good looks and vivacity. In memoirs of the time, she is described as extraordinarily attractive, and her fame quickly spread far beyond Paris. She became the darling of the aristocracy in Vienna, where she is said to have seduced the young Mozart. Gifts of houses, jewellery and clothing from her admirers made her rich, and when she returned to England, she brought with her the recipe for an almond mandel, for an almond paste that she had first tasted in Austria. Her large house in London's West End became a fashionable centre, and at every party she gave, there were always cakes and other sweets made from the almond paste, or marzipan, as it became known. Marchpane mixed with Eliza. Marzipan. Eliza ended her days in Brighton, where for a time she was the lover of the German Prince Regent. She died in 1830. From osternolatry to fossils. Mary Anning. Mary Anning was born on the 21st of May in 1799 and lived in the English seaside town of Lyme Regis in Dorset. As a child, she had a lucky escape when a woman carrying her was struck by lightning. Her family were very poor, which meant she hardly went to school. Instead, she taught herself to read and write. She spent a good deal of time searching the coast looking for what she called curiosities. When she was just 12, she and her brother discovered the skull of a mysterious creature poking out from a cliff. They thought he might be a crocodile, but in fact he was an ancient reptile known as a fish lizard. Later in her life, as she developed a better understanding of her finds, she realized they were actually fossils. Throughout her life, she made many incredible discoveries. This made her famous among some of the most important scientists of the day. They would visit her for advice and to discuss scientific ideas about fossils. And today, Mary Anning is remembered as one of the greatest fossil hunters to have ever lived. Another writer, but this time mostly for children. Many of you will have heard of Peter Rabbit and Jeremy Fisher, I'm sure. Hello. Beatrix Potter. Few 20th century English writers have been so continuously popular as Beatrix Potter. The 21 small tales she wrote for children, all but 2 of them published before 1914, have been loved by successive generations of readers. Her work has been translated into a dozen different languages, and people of all ages and nationalities still make the journey to her farmhouse in the English Lake District. In 1866, halfway through Queen Victoria's reign, she was born into a wealthy family in London. Her birthplace, number 2 Bolton Gardens in West Brompton, was a prosperous residential district. The road was not far from the 2 great South Kensington museums, the Victoria and Albert Museum, dedicated to the arts and sciences, and the Natural History Museum. Both were expanding while she was growing up, and both helped to form the tastes and interests of the girl whose work would one day be exhibited in the former museum. Between the ages of 15 and 30, Beatrix kept a secret journal written in a code. It was not until more than 20 years after her death that the code was cracked, and when the journal was finally published in 1966, it revealed a remarkable picture of upper middle class life in late Victorian Britain. The family spent many summers in the Lake District, hence her love for it and her reason for finally moving there and buying the farmhouse. Here's a passage from her journal, written when she was 30, and she always refers in her diary to fairies dancing. This is probably because she loved mushrooms and fungi, and traditionally circles of mushrooms were connected to fairies. From the diary. I went last evening to say goodbye to Mary Postlethwaite, who made a very pretty picture in the firelight dangling her fat baby. Perhaps my most sentimental leave-taking was with Don, the great farm dog. He came up and muddied me, as I was packing up Peter Rabbit at the edge of dark. I accompanied him to the stable gate, where he turned, holding it open with his side, and gravely shook hands. Afterwards, putting his paws solemnly on my shoulder, he licked my face and went away into the farm. Oh, I have a pleasant memory of Hawkshead another day, when I went to Tyson's shop and bought 2 striped petticoats. There was a pleasant, friendly, middle-aged lady in the shop who said, "I think I ought to know your face." Oddly enough, I thought the same. Ah, it was Mrs. Beck of Esthwaite Hall. I went afterwards part way up the steep road towards Grisdale, left the pony and walked across some rough intakes to the edge of a copse, getting funguses, and back near a little tumbling stream and some flaming wild hollies. The hawthorns down below were a sight in the sun. I was followed a long way by 2 cockerels because I had a basket. They thought it was food. It was a bright, sunny day, blue sky and mist. I think one of my pleasantest memories of Esthwaite is sitting on Oatmeal Crag on a Sunday afternoon, where there's a sort of table of rock with a dip, with the lane and the fields and the oak copse below my feet, and all the little tiny fungus people singing and bobbing and dancing in the grass under the leaves. I cannot tell what possesses me with the fancy that they laugh and clap their hands, especially the little ones that grow amongst dead leaves in the woods. Ah, I suppose it's the fairy rings. I remember I used to half believe and wholly play with fairies when I was a child. What heaven can be more real than to retain the spirit world of childhood, tempered and balanced by knowledge and common sense, to fear no longer the terror that flieth by night, yet to feel truly and understand a little, a very little, of the story of life. Now, you may have wondered why the title of this evening had a half in it. I hope when you hear about Broomus, you will understand. Broomus was a very famous living creature, but not a human. Broomus the polar bear was born in London Zoo on the 27th of November, 1949. Her mother was called Ivy and her father Misha. Broomus was named after her keepers Bruce and Sam, Sam being reversed. Math, Sam. She was the first polar bear to be successfully reared in Britain and was an immediate attraction for the public. In fact, she caused so much interest that in 1950, the zoo's annual attendance figures reached 3 million, around 1 million more than usual. And this figure has not been exceeded since. Broomus was female, but the press had incorrectly reported that she was a he. So the public thought the baby was male, and the error was not corrected at the time. Little Broomus was so popular that newsreels, books, postcards, toys, and other souvenirs were created in her honour. She died on the 17th of May, 1958, but until this day she is still very much remembered. By me too. In fact, I am writing this text in honour of Broomus on the 17th of May, 2021. So now we have the half for the gentleman. Winnie the Pooh. Winnipeg, or Winnie for short, was a rescued American black bear cub who was given in 1950 to the London Zoo by Harry Colburn as he had to go, during the war, to France. Colburn, who was born in England in Birmingham, had emigrated to Canada and was now a lieutenant in the Canadian Army. Winnie was very often visited by the well-known author Alan Alexander Milne, known as A. Milne, and his young son Christopher, because Christopher had fallen in love with the baby bear. This inspired A. Milne to write about Winnie, and his name lives on in the numerous stories about Winnie the Pooh, or Pooh Bear. And there is now even a statue of Winnie at London Zoo. There is also one in the Canadian town of Winnipeg, as this is how he got his name. As a result of the international success of the books, Winnie was famous. And when Winnie, in quotes, the playful and gentle bear, died in 1934, his death was publicized literally around the world. And now to the human gentleman. Most people think of Shakespeare as one of the greatest dramatists in history, but he was also a professional actor, one of the Lord Chamberlain's men. Later, in the reign of King James I, the King's men. An actor who was born in 1703 and whose father was also an actor and knew Shakespeare, wrote, quote, concerning Shakespeare's first appearance in the playhouse. When he came to London, he was without money and friends, and being a stranger, he knew not to whom to apply, nor by what means to support himself. At that time, coaches not being in use, and as gentlemen were accustomed to ride to the playhouse, Shakespeare, driven to the last necessity, went to the playhouse door and picked up a little money by taking care of the gentlemen's horses who came to the play. He became eminent even in that profession, and was taken notice of for his diligence and skill in it. He had soon more business than he himself could manage, and at last hired boys under him, who were known by the name of Shakespeare's boys. Some of the players, accidentally conversing with him, found him so acute and master of so fine a conversation that, struck therewith, they recommended him to the house, in which he was first admitted in a very low station. But he did not long remain so, for he soon distinguished himself, if not as an extraordinary actor, at least as a fine writer. His name is printed, as the custom was in those times, amongst those of the other players, before some old plays, but without any particular account of what sort of parts he used to play. However, one audience member wrote that he found the top of his performance was the ghost in his own Hamlet. From bonfires and fireworks to a natural philosopher, Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton was an English mathematician, physicist, astronomer, theologian, and author, described in his own time as a natural philosopher, who is widely recognized as one of the most influential scientists of all time, and a key figure in the scientific revolution. He's probably best known for his theory of gravity. Newton himself often told the story that he was inspired to formulate his theory of gravitation by watching the fall of an apple from a tree. The story is believed to have passed into popular knowledge after his niece told it to Voltaire. In 1727, Voltaire wrote, "Sir Isaac Newton, walking in his gardens, had the first thought of his system of gravitation upon seeing an apple falling from a tree." End of quote. Although it has been said that the apple story is an absolute nonsense and a myth, and that he did not arrive at his theory of gravity at any single moment, several of Newton's acquaintances do in fact confirm that incident. William Stukeley recorded in his Memoirs of Sir Isaac Newton's life a conversation with Newton in Kensington, London. Quote, "We went into the garden and drank tea under the shade of some apple trees, only he and myself. Amidst other discourse, he told me he was just in the same situation when, some time ago, the notion of gravitation came into his mind. Why should that apple always descend perpendicularly to the ground, thought he to himself, occasioned by the fall of an apple as he sat in contemplative mood. Why should it not go sideways or upwards, but constantly to the earth's centre? Assuredly, the reason is that the earth draws it. There must be a drawing power in matter, and the sum of the drawing power in the matter of the earth must be in the earth's centre, not in any side of the earth. Therefore does this apple fall perpendicularly or toward the centre. If matter thus draws matter, it must be in proportion of its quantity. There are, of course, several apple trees in England which are claimed to be the apple tree. It is also said that a descendant of the original tree can be seen growing outside the main gate of Trinity College, Cambridge, below the room where Newton lived when he studied there. Nobody knows. Charles Darwin is a name we will all know, but this is not from his Origin of Species, but from his autobiography. Quote, "I have said that in one respect my mind has changed during the last 20 or 30 years. Up to the age of 30 or beyond it, poetry of many kinds, such as the works of Milton, Gray, Byron, Wordsworth, Coleridge and Shelley, gave me great pleasure. Even as a schoolboy, I took intense delight in Shakespeare, especially in the historical plays. I have also said that formerly pictures gave me considerable, and music very great delight. But now, for many years, I cannot endure to read a line of poetry. I have tried lately to read Shakespeare and found it so intolerably dull that it nauseated me. I have also lost my taste for pictures or music. Music generally sets me thinking too energetically on what I have been at work on, instead of giving me pleasure. I retain some taste for fine scenery, but it does not cause me the exquisite delight which it formerly did. On the other hand, novels, which are works of the imagination, though not of a very high order, have been for years a wonderful relief and pleasure to me, and I often bless all novelists. A surprising number have been read aloud to me, and I like all if moderately good, and if they do not end unhappily, against which a law ought to be passed. A novel, according to my taste, does not come into the first class unless it contains some person whom one can thoroughly love. And if a pretty woman, all the better." Thank you very much for joining us. It was very kind of you, and thank you to dear Hillers for organising it. Wonderful.